What up, y'all? It's your boy, OSGOE. That is one Sir Grove of VVT in England. And it is a bright and sunny day here on the East Coast. It is of the U.S. It is a bit brisk. Nonetheless, it's sunny out. And, these few little clouds in the sky that are kind of some dark clouds off over here to this side of the sky. Hey, man, they're offset. They're offset by the sun on the other side. And, hey, yo, TGIF, thank God it's Friday. So this is my second podcast of the day on this Friday. This is a mobile podcast. If you're a fan of the show and you support the show, thank you for tuning in and thank you for your support. So we're off to a good start here in terms of our clothing line launch. I want to talk a little bit more about that and just how we got to this point. That is 495 and our partnership with L4, that's level 4. How we all came together and how we rock it the way that we rock it. So, little backstory here. Some of y'all, if you're new to the show and you're just learning about it, casting 495 celebrities worldwide, C4CW, we are 495. 495 is an organization. We're 495 Nation. And we have 495 members coast to coast. 495 is a fraternal organization. It's a fraternity and a sorority originally at its roots, at its core. And it is based on American and international traditions. It's based on some principles that we came to know, learn about, and understand. And so when we were into our teenage years beginning, we noticed that in terms of social order, there are folks, or were, kind of at the heads of these international organizations, doing big things, so to speak, politically speaking. And we often, wondered, like, hey, how are these people doing this? How are these organizations structured? What is their origin, their origins? How did they come to be? How did they get to be in these positions of power? So, naturally, being the inquisitive youth that we were, we read up on it. We did our research. We carried out our research. And we came to understand how some of these things have come to exist. And we said, okay, well, in the same tradition, in the same traditional sense of it all, we need to form our own organization. And we need to do some right in this world and right some wrongs. So we formed 495. My cousin actually approached me, by my biological cousin. I've talked about this before a bit. And he said, Grove. This is my cousin Rizzo, too. My cousin Rizzo, who was recently in England for 4 years and earned his undergraduate degree there. And we both are of English heritage. Our grandfather was an Englishman. And so he traveled to England and took up residence there and residency, and he became a historian, and he comes from a line of historians. So on his side, on his dad's side, and his grandfather was a code breaker during World War II. On his dad's side, he worked with codes and ciphers, and so in that, that's not our mutual grandfather. Our grandfather was a telegrapher, and he worked with codes as well. I'm referring to specifically his grandfather on his father's side. His grandfather on his mother's side is our mutual grandfather. And they both happen to work with codes in World War II to some degree. And so, at any rate, our mutual grandfather was in World War II, and he was awarded a Purple Heart for his valor. He lost a leg, had a prosthetic limb, rode a Honda motorbike, taught us how to ride motorbikes when we were quite young, how to fish, hike, hunt, pitch a tent, live in the woods, survive outdoors, you name it. He was an outdoorsman. He was a master craftsman. He had a metal shop, wood shop. He built a home for his wife, my grandmother, and his daughters. And he had been in Missouri at some point. And so that's a quick backstory in terms of my grandfather. I've talked about that before. When we were growing up out west, there were gangs that began to materialize at some point in the 1980s. They had always been there. There had always been gangs. You can look up U.S. gang history and you can see the gangs and the clubs and the outlaw groups and the different organizations that were and have been. Violent street gangs from California, Chicago, other parts of the country. They began to move outward from their respective cities and states, and they gravitated toward our community because the price of rock cocaine, in other words, crack cocaine, became more expensive and more profitable in our city, our town, than anywhere else in America. And when that information was made available to the public, gangs being as sophisticated as they are at the top levels of said gangs, gang members were directed to our town to set up shop, and they did just that. So when we knew that the gangs were coming, and that gangs were going to be even more widespread than they had ever been, we said, oh gosh, this is going to be interesting. And so we decided that it was our time in history to form an organization similar to that of the Guardian Angels. Now, did we do dirt? Yes, we did. Admittedly so. Were we like other street gangs? Kind of, but not really. Did we and do we consist of Bloods and Crips? Yes. Yes, we do. What we did was something that was hybrid, that was different, because we understood that not everyone in a gang is criminally active, criminally deviant. Not everyone, societally speaking, sociologically speaking, psychologically speaking, politically speaking, is criminally active. Some people are just in gangs merely for the pride of it all, just to say that they're part of something, and they want to represent their club, their gang, their set, their group, because it's like a family, man. And in a lot of ways, it really is a family. You have gangs that consist of biological family members. They're actually biologically related. And then you have other gang members who are obviously not related, biologically speaking. But in all, the gang structure is like a family, and it does come to be a family. So, in the surrogate family sense of it all. So, we knew that gangs were coming en masse, and that it was inevitable. And so, we, knowing that, we said to ourselves, all right, so this is what we got to do. We have to band together. We have to be something. We have to form something, because gangs are coming deep. They are coming in droves. They are coming in waves. We all played sports together. We were all Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts together. We were all hiking, fishing, hunting together. We were all under one roof before, and now these gangs are going to come to our town, and they're going to try to overrun our town. And that's the history of it. And that's a reality. And that's exactly what they tried to do. They try to come to our town, and they try to set up shop, and they try to take over the town. That's what gangs try to do, man. Now, keep in mind, in our town, it was a small town. So you have limited resources in small towns a lot of times. And unless there's someone with a crap load of money like Bill Gates, and he can hire private security, for the whole city, then, ordinarily, cities have limited resources, fiscally speaking. So some towns, some townships, some municipalities, some cities were better able to deal with the phenomenon of gangs. Other towns, some towns were ill-equipped. They just didn't have the resources. They were ill-prepared. They weren't well-coordinated, and their towns were rattled. They were rattled, and people ran amok, man. Gangs ran amok, and those towns didn't do so well. Those cities didn't do so well. Our town, it put up a good fight, man, I would say. Yeah, to say the least, put up a good fight. Cops did their job. Not all cops are law-abiding. So anytime there's that element that exists, that cartel element, mafia, organized crime element, whenever that's there, and it entices folks, someone is going to decide to break the law and get involved in organized crime. And so, like any town, any metro area that's considered a town, you have that element. And so, some in law enforcement, they were swayed to the dark side and got involved in organized crime, and they were out to make a profit. So you've got this combination of gangs that had come to our city, our town, to reap the benefits of crack cocaine, where the profit was higher than anywhere else in America at the time. That was published information. That was in the news. You had these police officers, some of them, who decided to involve themselves in that element of crime. And so you just had this nexus of all these gangs coming from all 50 states to our and U.S. territories, to our town, to our city. Now imagine that. You're a kid, and you know that this is going on because you're a teenager. You just became a teenager, and these gangs from every state in the union, they're on their way to your town to overrun your town if they can. What are you gonna do, man? We literally had kids like in our classroom who, because they had to become young adults very quickly. All right, gangs are coming with machine guns to your town. And it's in the news that they're coming to make this profit, this money, to share in the revenue of the crack cocaine epidemic. And you're a kid reading this and hearing about this in the news. And so what do? Do you just kind of sit there and just kind of like throw your hands up and just say, okay, well, woe is us. What do you do? Okay, so we're enterprising, man. We're entrepreneurial. So we say to ourselves, yo, this is, to use an expression from Nas, the rapper, this is Illmatic. This ain't good, man. Like, this is all kinds of bad. And I'm making light of it now in some respect, but man, you talk about the dark age, man, the dark ages. You talk about dark times of times past. Yo, so we said, man, we've got to form a committee, literally, as teenagers. Because keep in mind, we're familiar at that point with organizational structures, Rob's Rules of Order. We were nerds, man. We read books. But very quickly, being the young nerds that we were, we said to ourselves, yo, we're going to have to become adults right now. Like, yeah, this is gonna get ugly, man. And in order to survive this, cocaine crack epidemic, the post-Reagan years, going into the Bush years, in order to survive this cocaine drug epidemic, police drug gang crack war, we're going to have to become adults right now. Those were scary times, man. Scary times, because it was a war on America's streets in the 1980s. And I said the 1980s. It was a war in America that was an undeclared war in America until law enforcement said, okay, it's the war on drugs. Then it was coined the war on drugs. It was a war in the United States, undeclared civil war, but it was a war in society on our streets. And, I mean, man, you'd be at a house party and someone would pull a drive-by. I mean, you'd just be trying to have a good time, man, in light of everything that was going on around your community in terms of the war. And you'd be just trying to have a good time, man, with your people. You know, you'd have you'd just be with your folks from your organization, from your street militia, from your clan, from your group. And it'd be whatever time of day, man, and there'd just be a drive-by shooting. There'd be a stabbing, there'd be a robbery, there'd be a heist. You just read about this stuff all day long in the news. Keep in mind, and through word of mouth, keep in mind, no internet back then. No internet back then. So, on some level of order in society, it hadn't fallen, but there was civil disorder, man. Because police agencies, law enforcement agencies, the law enforcement community, that is LEO, the law enforcement community. The law enforcement community was under fire, man. Law enforcement was under fire. Our communities were under fire. And gangs were widespread. Again, gangs from all 50 states had zeroed in, homed in on where it was that our town was located. And were coming in waves to our town to sell drugs, to distribute drugs, to transport drugs, guns, weapons, narcotics, illicit materials, contraband, black market items, materials, you name it, racketeering from A to Z. I remember there was a time, because the only kind of solace that one could have back then, a lot of times, was just to sit at a public library. Kind of like the movie Oblivion, man, and just read books. So I was sitting there and I was like, yo, Encyclopedia of Organized Crime. And I just started to read this thick tome of data about organized crime from A to Z, like the Bible of organized crime. Like, what is this organization? What are their methods? What are their techniques? What are their strategies? How were they formed? Who formed it? How many members do they have? What are their statistics in terms of their reach globally, domestically? What cases have been prosecuted? What happened in those cases? Yada, yada, yada. I used to read that kind of information. Reference books. You name it, man. The history of countries. The history of peoples, civilizations, ancient, modern. You name it. And so we would just sit, 495 members, we would sit in the library and we would read silently for hours on it. We would just sit and just read books. And libraries later, flash forward some decades down the road, I visited some libraries where you have these young kids just being unruly and loud and whatnot. But back then, there was a very strict policy that it was a quiet zone, despite what was going on in the streets around us. Now, you see, this is a true story. You have a lot of these people that make these gangsta movies, right? And you've never heard this story before. A lot of you. If you're unfamiliar with this part of American history, this is American history. This is the history of 495. This is how we came to be as an organization. So I would sit there with Spank T, that is Spank T, member of 495, and a friend of mine. His name is Derek. He played in a band, and his dad played in a band, and he joined 495 because we were very artistic. We were very musically inclined. Trevor, aka Spank T, one of my friends from childhood, who's 495, fellow rap group member, band member. We had equipment together, man. We were roommates, and he and I invested in equipment. We put our money into equipment with DJ Slow-Mo. We used to record at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington, in the basement of one of the fraternities there, because DJ Slow-Mo is a member of that fraternity, and he and I were both in similar programs when we were kids, and he and I were roommates as well over the years. So we would all be under the same roof, and the way that we expressed ourselves was through music. And we were investing in equipment, just like you hear other artists did. I know Ice-T, I've seen his videos, interviews. The rapper Ice-T, when he was in the U.S. military, he said that one of the things that people were doing in the barracks in the Army is they would invest in DJ stereo equipment, and they would have these DJ sound wars. They would try to outdo each other, and they would just blast music when they were able to do that, and they would build up their equipment base, and they would have these DJ sound wars. So similarly, we, 495, that's what we were doing. We were amassing our electronics, whatever we could invest in from the monies that we had made, that we had earned through whatever enterprising that we did. Raking leaves, mowing lawns, being kids, in a town surrounded by gangs. So we're kids at the time, teenagers, and we're in high school, and so the one recreational activity, aside from athletics, was music, urban hip hop, rap music, with the addition of rock music. So I was a skater as well in this whole time period. During this time that I'm referring to, I was also a skater. I was the dude. I'm trying to think of a character from a movie. I played the role of an eccentric. I should have been in theater. I studied theater in the books, in the textbook, but I wasn't in theater because I was a little shy. I was a little bashful. When I was a kid, I was actually quite bashful. But I knew that in order to be an entertainer, I had to overcome that. So what we would do is we would have these open mic nights, or some of them we would host ourselves, and some of them we would just show up at these open mics. And slowly but surely, gradually, we would get up on the mic. I mean, it was socially awkward because we were learning how to rap. The homie at the time, Loot Money, he was very instrumental in helping me learn how to rap. Because Spank T, Loot Money, Scoot, that's the Jewish homie, Scoot. He and I, we argue back and forth. We've done this thing since childhood. We bicker back and forth. We have these arguments. But that's the homie Scoot. Scoot, Mac Tension, Zone. We all used to go to this town that was to the north of the city that I'm referring to, where we lived. We would go to this other town that was to the north of us, and we would record in this garage at someone's home who we knew. Loot Money, with Milltown Poets, aka the Underground Railroad. He used to go by the rap moniker CDC, Christ Devious Creation. And he and his group, Cash Money Makers, CMM, we were introduced to Tot Loon through him, aka Tot Carlo. So we would go to a town to the north where they knew people because we were invited there through CA, which is Criminal Alliance, which Loot Money was one of the heads of CA. He would invite us along with Zone because he and Zone were partnered up in the rap game with Tension. That's Mac Tension. They would invite us, Mac Tension, Zone, Loot Money, to this home in this town to the north of where we lived. And that's how I was introduced to Tiny. Tiny was a Crip from California, back and forth up and down the coast. And he and I, at first, we'd see each other around town and we just kind of give each other looks. He'd throw up C's, I'd throw up B's. You know what I'm saying? He'd hit me with Crip, I'd hit him with Blood. Blood's gang, you know, so it's back and forth. Blood's gang, Crip's gang. And then Loot Money was instrumental in diffusing that rivalry. Loot's a Crip. And he was like, yo, I'm going to help y'all stop this beef. I'm a mutual in this, and y'all need to tie up these flags. So Loot Money, though a Crip, he used to be out on the block rocking green. He's one of the very first cats that I saw rocking money green. And that's one of the ways in which we adopted green with our Paru gang set and 495 set. And because Loot was instrumental in that alliance. And similar to how you hear that in San Diego with cats there, you know, rocking the green, Blood's gang, we were doing that too. We've been doing that for decades. And and I'm referring to Mitchie Slick, and I'm referring to his crew there from San Diego, SD in California. I used to live in the Bay Area, and I met some cats out there in the Oakland area. I lived in Hayward one summer, and I met these cats from these different gang sets and whatnot. And I was representing my posse out there. And so when I went back to the Northwest, I took my gang knowledge from California and broke it down for the homies. And so the point is that gangs were formally structured. There's a hierarchical system in the gang structure of it all. And despite some gang members being on the lower rungs of the gang, the lower frameworks of the hierarchy, at the top of various gangs, you have a highly organized structure similar to any military command structure. In fact, some organizations, in order to join, you have to have a background in higher education, because these organizations, they're structured as corporations. They are actually corporations on paper. And I know that sounds crazy to mainstream society that sees these gangs wilding out in the streets, and they look like they're disorderly and they look like they're disorganized. Those are the lower levels of gangs. The higher levels of gangs, they're absolutely organized, and they're organized along the lines of cartels and corporations, officially, with board members and chairpersons, and that's a fact. So, growing up out west, I was exposed to gang culture, and while we were in the process of codifying, that is, structuring 495, my cousin Rizzo, he was gathering information, and given that he's an intellectual and he comes from the family background that he does, comes from a good family, a long line lineage of war fighters, and historians, people involved in codes and ciphers, a traditional European American family. He knows a lot of stuff, man. And as kids, man, who were precocious, we knew a lot of stuff at our age. And so we knew how to put things together. We knew how to structure things, and we knew how to make things official. And we knew how to launch campaigns. We knew how to promote. We knew how to organize and assemble. And we knew how to regulate, and we knew how to carry out business, how to handle business in the streets and in the boardrooms. So we were in the streets, we were politicking, and Rizzo would come back to me. We'd all meet up. We'd have meetups, we'd have meetings, and Rizzo and all of us, we'd sit around, essentially a round table or banquet style table, and we would all contribute to the report, and we would say, to the committee meetings notes, and we'd say, all right, so, we have decorum, and this is what I have. This is, what do you have? This is what I have. So we would compare notes, and we'd have a picture of what was going on in not just the city, but in the region. And man, we were connected to every type of organization that you could think of. We'd be out in these towns, neighboring towns and cities, up and down the coast. And there was one night when we all had like baseball bats and guns and chains, sawed-off shotguns, pistols, literally fucking chains, and and baseball bats, aluminum baseball bats, and there's like 12 of us on one side and like 12 on the other side, and keep in mind we would roll in teams, so like I'd say I'd say over 10%, just conservative estimate, like 10% of at the time, this is in the early stages, like 10% of the youth in our town, like where we lived in the north, on the north side, the river side down where I lived, like 10% of the youth, I'm talking about the youth, man, like where I lived, because it was a historic community, like 10% of the youth in our age group, they were all 495. So we would just roll with like literally like, man, we'd have like a whole neighborhood of like kids with us, and we'd be in the streets just like you'd see in New York, just like you'd see like in the movie The Warriors. But man, sometimes, man, we would just count. There'd be like 151 of us, man. And then we would go to other parts of the city, and there would be kids from like the South End, and they would be out at some park, and there'd just be like hundreds of kids, and they'd represent the South Side. And then there were the kids on the Bay Side. That is the West Side. So Riverside is the East Side, or East Side Piru, and then on the Bay Side, that's the West Side. That's right there on the coast. Like you could like toss a stone into the like Pacific Ocean and to the Sound. So at any rate, it was us, man, as kids. It was just like a bunch of kids in the streets, man, like Lord of the Flies. It was crazy. So yo, check it out. So these skinheads, as it turns out, they're skinheads against racial prejudice. Skinheads against racial prejudice. SHARP. Skinheads. Skinheads against racial prejudice. They were against racial prejudice, but they were skinheads. So, as I was alluding to, I was someone who played the role of an eccentric. So I was doing crazy stuff before you even had kids doing like rainbow colored hair, right? no disrespect, I'm saying in that lineage, I was doing stuff similar in that I was wearing like purple sunglasses, pink sunglasses. I was shaving my hair in crazy different patterns. And I even shaved an M, as in McDonald's, in the top of my sister's hair. So she had a McDonald's arch for her hairdo, and she was not pleased with that. But yeah, man, I used to rock all kinds of like outfits, and I had the purple sunglasses. I used to call them the Pimp Lokester purples. I had the Pimp Lokester pinks. In fact, I did a rap about it. And so, amid everything that was going on, or rather in the midst of everything that was going on, I was just, man, trying to keep up the morale for our crew. And so I was always kind of like rolling with that whole like class clown kind of persona. I was just doing something that was just like wacky and zany. And so, man, I was also a rebel skateboarder. So I went from being preppy, rocking the prep gear, the polos, the collared, sleeved tops, to rocking the grunge, to doing the whole like the acid wash jeans with the ripped up knees and the airwalks where the soles were burned out because I skated so hard. I just wrap them up in duct tape, and I'd just be on like the city bus, and people would be looking at me like, yo, dude, you got an acid wash jean jacket, you got a pink shirt, TNC surf, you got a mohawk, basically, with some like gel in it and some Aquanet. You got jeans with ripped up knees, and you got airwalk shoes with no soles, just like duct tape, and your skateboard with an anarchy symbol on it. Like, what up, dude? And I'm just like, man, I skate hard, dude. So I was into that whole like rock, metal, like thrash scene. And I roll with these skateboard dudes too. We had a crew called Skaters Defacing Public Property, SDPP, Sierra Delta Papa. Skaters Defacing Public Property. And we were skate or die dudes, man. Like, we would just skate all day. So I went from among and around these different crews, like, all the time. So I'd be chilling with some preppy dudes. I'd be chilling with some athletic dudes. I played sports. I'd be chilling with some artistic dudes doing, like, art and stuff, like graphic design, illustration. I'd be chilling with some dudes that, like, played in bands. I'd be chilling with some, like, hippie dudes. I just moved around these different circles. And I always had these different personas. I mean, it was always me, but you know what I mean? Like, I played the role of an eccentric, because I was gifted. So, and I was very extroverted. I was a very extroverted person, very, very extroverted, and very outgoing. And so a lot of times, like Rizzo and I and our friends, we would be at we'd be at the YMCA, we'd be at the Boys and Girls Club, we'd be at different like sports events like baseball fields, soccer fields, football fields, track and field fields. Like, we would be all over town, man. Wherever there was stuff going on, if there was a parade, if there was like an outdoor function, if there was like a state fair, if there was like a movie at the theater, if there was like some event with like some VIP celebrity spokesperson, man, we were out in the town, like out in the city, and we became very popular doing that. When the gang culture rolled around, there were people from my cousin's side of town who they looked at the guys I was rolling with on my side of town, guys and gals, as if we were like, some of them looked upon us like we were social outcasts, like we were somehow like disestablishment, and we were like against the system and this kind of thing. Well, like I said, I moved around different circles. So my uncle who raised me is Rizzo's dad. So I would be on the bass side a lot of times. And when I'd be on the bass side, sometimes I'd be rocking the like thrash kind of look, you know, pre-emo. You know, I got like everything I got is like, you know, just looking like I just skated hard. Cause I did. I literally had my skateboard with me, and I'd be over in this wealthy community, and I'd have my skateboard, and I'd be like skating up on the curbs and skating around in the streets, and these seniors and retirees would just be looking at me, and I'd just be like on my board skating. Sometimes I'd be prepped up, man. I'd be looking preppy because I clean up real well, and I just blend in, man, like, you know, like totally sociable. And you know, you would never think that I was with an outlaw skate gang or an insane Uzi spy gang. You'd just be like, oh, look at that kid. He looks like he looks like Carlton from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He's probably a really nice guy. And I am, by the way. So but yo, man, for real, like seriously, I am. But so man, I played different roles. And that was my function back then within the organization, man, of 495, is I would go around and go and move in and around these different circles, and I was known for that. Like, I would get down with some dudes at the arcade, with some nerd dudes. They'd be telling me about like Dungeons and Dragons, you know. So it was always gathering intel, man. It was always gathering information, and Rizzo was doing the same thing essentially. And all of us were, because we had to know what was going on in our city, man. And we had to know how other groups were doing what they were doing. And when I say Rizzo was gathering information, I meant we all did. Spank T did, Brock did, Loot did, Zone did, Tension did. Anyone who has been part of 495, when you're in an organization, you got to know what's going on in your town, in your region, in your state, in your country. And so we learned how to do that. Scoot did that. You know, Aaron did that. Everybody who has been part of 495. And like I said, man, at some point it was like, man, more than 10% of the youth from my side of town, the historic Riverside district. So we would like meet up at parks, and people just be like, okay, what do you got? Okay, what's going on down here? What are these people doing? Oh, okay, their networks like this. All right, who's the head of that? All right, and this person's doing that. Who are the two? Who's the right-hand man? You know, who are the two people under this person with this person? Okay, who's under them? Just break it down, man. Like, what's up? Who's who? Who's doing what? Who, what, when, where, why, how? That's how we gathered. That's how we gathered the news, man. That's how we gathered the intel, and that's how we disseminated the information within our own organization. Because keep in mind, gangs had come from all 50 states, and we're kids at the time, man. Teenagers becoming young adults, and these gangs wanted to take over our town. They literally wanted to turn these historic neighborhoods into trap spots. They want to take a home that's beautiful and gorgeous and aesthetically magnificent in the context of its of the history of that home. Even in its even as aged as it may look, those homes are beautiful homes, and turn of the century homes. And nonetheless, you have these criminal elements that want to gut the inside of those homes and turn them into trap houses for drug distribution and other racketeering activities, illicit business. So that was a scary thing as a kid, man. And in order to survive that where we were, we made the decision that we had to get involved in that culture. We had to know about it. We had to know it inside out. We had to see how it operated and the function of it all and the mindset of those involved in that world. We had to understand that. We had to wrap our minds around that and immerse ourselves in that culture, because that's what the government does. That's what agencies do. And we knew that the gangs were coming in advance. We had a math instructor who was also, he was dually hatted. He was also the football coach. And he and other teachers, instructors, faculty members, committee board members, school officials, they knew, public officials, they knew that the gangs were coming, and they had the brief that contained information about every street gang in America on file. It was a tome of information. We had access to it. So we knew this gang rocks their hat this way. They wear this color, these colors. This is their modus operandi. This is how they float. This is how they run business. This is how they're structured. This is the history. This is when they were founded. These were the founding members. These are the territories in which they're known to operate. These are the types of illicit activities in which they're involved. We had all that data as kids, pre-teens, going into high school. So, armed with that information for survival at that time, we formed an organization to fight back. Just like, very similar to how the CIA will infiltrate foreign governments and extract intelligence information in order to know what adversaries are planning in the geopolitical context of it all. So that's what we did in the 1980s and the 1990s. Because had we not done that, our town would have been overrun by gangs, and we would have been hopeless, and we would have had no recourse. And if you look at some sections of that town to this day, the opioid crisis ruined and wrecked sections of town that to this day, as of this recording, keep in mind this will be and is part of a book that is being written for the screenplay, which will ultimately become one of the 495 movies that we're in the process of making. Some of those sections of town are utterly destroyed. They really are. I mean, can they be remade? Well, of course. But in the meantime, in the interim, those sections of town are burned out. And when I talk to people who still live out there, and I get their reports, they say to me that there are parts of town where virtually no one goes, save for a handful of stragglers. And that you can see the opioid crisis epidemic in full frontal view. It's just right there. Hypodermic needles in the park. They've got hypodermic needle cleanup crews on an ongoing daily basis. Kids find needles, parents find needles, people in the neighborhood find needles, all over town. And, so it's disgusting, man. And it's sad. And we saw that coming. We saw that coming, and a lot of guys, a lot of gals, wanted out from the beginning in terms of that world. Because when you're a kid and you know that that's going to happen and that's what is going to be the fate of your town, at least to some extent, if you know that's going to happen to your city and that it's unavoidable, what do? So sadly, some people folded and they succumbed to the drug epidemic, the crisis. And it really is sad, man. So we knew back in the 1980s that going into the 1990s, there was to be a police drug gang war on our streets. And so we did what we had to do to survive those times. One of the things that I did when I left the West Coast was I did everything that I should have done in high school and after high school. I literally, very similar to going back in time, I did everything to make up for the time in high school that I skipped school. So I went back to college. I worked on record 100 different jobs, literally, like writing this job, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, 10, okay? 10 jobs, and then 10 more jobs, 20, and then ultimately on paper, 50, 70, like that many jobs, like over 100 jobs. And I'm talking over the course of 25 years, just working odd jobs, landscaping, doing IT work, contract work, doing this, doing that, odd jobs here and there. And every time I would get paid for a job, I'd write it down. Okay, I worked here, I worked for this company, I did this. Over 25 years, man, I've worked for over 100 different, I've had 100 different jobs. And so I made up for the time that I wasn't in the classroom out west when I was distracted by everything that was going on around me and us as an organization. Because if those things had not been going on back on the West Coast, keep in mind, our city was being overrun by massive gang infiltration. Massive, historic, enormous, tremendous gang infiltration. It was widespread on an unprecedented level of reality. It wasn't like a city where a few gangs show up or a handful of gangs materialize. I'm talking about gangs from every state in the union who came to share in the revenue of every illicit activity under the sun. Imagine that. That's a terrible nightmare scenario. So, in the context of that undeclared war of the 1980s, 1990s, which in some context was indeed a declared war on drugs, when I left that war zone, I then returned to school and the workplace because, quite frankly, out west during those times, to get hired on at a company, options were limited. I mean, you could go to work at Boeing. You could go to work for the city. I mean, it was a handful of jobs, and there was no internet then. The internet was virtually non-existent. So access to information in terms of the World Wide Web, that came at a later time, late 1990s going into the early 2000s, and it was rudimentary internet in terms of it being in its very beginnings. And internet speeds and connections were very slow. The availability of certain information was limited, and sources highly questionable. You didn't have the internet that exists now, where one can go online and retrieve, find, search, basically any kind of information on the planet. It wasn't like that back then. And jobs were sparse, and the economy was terrible. You had the dot-com bubble burst in California. So you had people leaving the state of California. You had, I heard one source, I believe it was BBC, had indicated that 2/3 of all high net worth individuals at the time lost money, significant, considerable amounts of money, and ended up broke, more or less. People who had previously large sums of money found themselves without money and almost largely impecunious, penniless. The statistic was something to the effect of going from being a high net worth individual with very large sums of money to making less than $18 an hour, $18 an hour or less. Quite frankly, you can't live today on the East Coast well with with the $20 an hour job in a lot of places. It's just, you can't. So in some neighborhoods, in some communities, if you make $35 an hour, you're barely scraping by, if that. And it's sad, man. The numbers are astronomical, like Carl Sagan, astronomical, as has been used as an expression before. Numbers are like the numbers that you see in the movie Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Spoiler alert, where one of the two women, they go to the event, as spectators, and one goes to buy a Coca-Cola from the machine, and she says to the other woman, "Hey, do you have some change? I'm kind of low. Price has gone up, and a can of Coke was something like $10. So that's almost the reality that we live in now. So I moved to the East, have had over 100 jobs. I have friends who have worked for major companies, LexisNexis, Microsoft, telecoms, you name it. And when people thought that we were disestablishment, they didn't know that we're actually a patriotic organization, and they didn't know that we've actually been working in the white-collar corporate environment, and that I and us, we've worked for major U.S. companies, corporations. I've been at a major IT company, multi-billion-dollar company. I was offered stock in the company. I've worked at similar companies, and I've invested in the U.S. and foreign markets. I've invested in the stock markets. So again, you had people who didn't know exactly what we were doing, and our peers, some of them, they thought that we were antisocial, or they thought that we were disestablishment, or that we were, outlaw, or, they just had no idea. They had no clue. They had no idea that I went white collar, corporate, and that I became a U.S. government defense contractor, and that I got certified in IT, information technologies, and in other fields, because how would they know? So the point is, 495 has come a long way. We just launched our clothing line internationally. We have new designs that we're working on, that are being made now, that are underway. Several designs have already been made. And so that's where we are. In terms of independent filmmaking, I've been working with someone on a documentary, helping with international foreign film press, PR, public relations. And I come from a background in audio production engineering, because when it was the 1980s and 1990s, the sound equipment that we had, that we invested in, that constituted our radio base of operations. That's how organizations from our era would broadcast. It would be with the types of equipment that we invested in, that we purchased. And so every crew, every group, every clan, every tribe, every clique, every network, every outfit had some type of equipment to make music, or to make sound, and to play like in a band, or to be like rappers or rock stars or rap stars, folk music, you name it. We did it all. We've done it all. And bluegrass, jazz, flowetry, poetry. I'm your boy, One Sir Grove. The movie in the making, 495. Word, one.